Hello, students, and welcome back to Module 3. We are going to be talking about the next part of the process that we've been talking about. So what we're going to be kind of diving into today is the idea, as you can see on your screen, of groups and networks. Essentially, the groups that we associate inside our day-to-day lives make up a lot of the socialization, as we've been talking about, of how we learn our culture, our norms, our values, our traditions, our rituals, in many cases, our identities, right? Because this group that we're within tends to help enforce whether we do things or we don't do things. And then we're also going to be discussing the benefits and the purposes of networks. And many of you may know the term networking. Think about LinkedIn, think about all the different social groups and networks you may be a part of here within Arizona State University or within your own life. Think about high school, right, where you're part of certain scenes, certain cliques, certain groups. They play a large part in defining our identity. So as we're discussing this, we're going to be looking at what is the sociological construction or the idea behind why sociology cares about groups and networks. Well, first things first, and pardon me for being in way of some of this video here, right? But we have the different generations. We have Gen Z, Millennial, Gen X, and the one that you can't see right behind me are the baby boomers. But essentially what you're looking at is what are groups? What are they broken down as? What are they understood as? How are they built, or how are they contrived or built or utilized between day-to-day interactions? Well, I can explain this to you. So essentially, a little bit about me, if you don't already know this from the lectures. I was a director of research of business development, right? So I was a director who was involved in the order of looking up data, using quantifiable and quantitative data. And then we would use generational data to predict buying patterns in different companies, members, donators, and etc. So you can take this knowledge and you can take it into so many different atmospheres and different viable existences within the corporate and the non-for-profit world, depending where you're going. So in sociology, what we're talking about when we say groups, broken down essentially is this. It's a social group, means two or more people who interact and have the shared identity. So think about this, right? Your social clique, the people you associate with. These are the people you share an identity with. You have values, norms, and traditions. You share ideas and cultural conceptions, material, non-material culture. And it's two or more people that makes a social group. So think group projects, a club, gathering of friends, meeting of coworkers for drinks, as it says on the slide. Now, there are different types of groups. It's not just a social group. We're not all just hanging out in social cliques, right? As you can see on the slide here, we have different types, right? This was crazy. This is just generational data. And then this is people hanging out for dinner. These are groups, social groups. But the different types of groups that we interact with, it really doesn't matter. So aggregates, these are people in the same space in the same time. So this doesn't really mean you know each other. It just means you're sharing space, right? You're at an airport. This is an aggregate. You're all going to somewhere, but you don't really know each other, and it's unlikely that you'll engage with one another. This is kind of like this idea here with the concert, right? You're sharing a space. You have something that you're sharing, right? You're going to a concert. You're going to Dutch Bros to get some coffee, Starbucks, Black Rock coffee, your drink of choice, right? Your location of choice. You can also see this as a rally or a festival or a concert. So we have the photo here, but you can think about the term crowd. This very much ties to this construction of an aggregate. An aggregate of people is a crowd of people, people who are at a same venue as you in the same shared space. And you could be sharing an opinion, a fight for rights, a love for coffee, or just in the same place at the same time, like an airport. Now, what we do when we have these groups is we break them down into aggregates. And the aggregates are broken down into categories. And these categories are then built into how we characterize certain groups of people. What I'm saying by this is generational grouping. Now, again, I'm covering part of the slide here with this, which I'm not totally enthused about, but whatever on that side, right? But we have taken generational data and been able to try to predict people's reactions and how they interact based on the socialization that was within that generation. Now, I'm not a huge fan, even though I did it for a living, of taking generations and totally limiting it by that dynamic, because when we run into this with millennial, right? There's so many millennials that don't identify as the millennial category because some grew up with complete access to technology. Some grew up having rotary phones and no internet. Gen Z, you grew up without any type of lack of internet. So you have been seen very unified on this, but as times are changing, many of you are going to have lines in the sand that you live through, right? There are some people who are too young to have remembered certain things. A great example of the shared experience, and we'll talk about this in a few slides, is one of the things that unifies millennials is many of us were alive and remember when 9/11 happened. And this tends to be a way to kind of sharedly and collectively experience something. So The question here is, can a non-group become a social group, right? Can the aggregate become unified into a shared experience and collective behavior? Yeah, of course they can. Aggregates and categories are viewed as non-groups, right? But during times of crisis, shared experience, as I was just saying, these individuals within this group can tend now to join together inside this actual shared collection, this experience trauma. If you're there for someone's birth, that unifies. So whether it's positive, whether it's negative, this idea, this construction of being able to go from an aggregate to a social group, absolutely possible. When people experience a shared pain or experience, it builds social bonds that can help establish a framework of unity, creating a group. I mentioned before 9/11 for millennials, this is something that really unifies. We all in my generation can share where we were, what we were doing when 9/11 happened. It's very likely that all of us now can share how we experienced multi-generational, actually, social group, the pandemic. So as we share experiences, as we share these collective traumas or benefits, you tend to build a bond. And that social bond is what Durkheim talks about with social facts that creates this unification. Now let's go a little bit further into the type of groups. Now you can't exactly see it here, right here, but I have like a classroom photo, right? And then a family walking, but there are two different types of groups, and I've referenced this before. Primary or close-knit emotional bonds, these are your family, these are your close friends. These tend to have what are called expressive functions. You're going to not technically go to them and ask only business advice. You can actually talk at an emotional level. You can share your feelings of why you're scared, hesitated, excited about something. So this tends to be primary groups fall into the family or close friends, those who have impact on us. We can express, we can emote. That's the key word there, expressive functions that we're talking. They're not strictly pragmatic. They're not strictly business. Now, secondary groups, these are where you get a lot of your networking, right? You get a lot of opportunities. Greta Vetter will talk about this later in our chapter, but it's through secondary groups that we tend to find the most social mobility, because it's likely that if you went only with your primary group, that many of the people in your primary group have the same socioeconomic status as you. They grew up in the same environment as you. They have the same, or at least close income as you. So getting upwards from the ladder, hard to do if you're within the same group. But these secondary groups, these less personal, more goal-oriented groups, larger, more impersonal, tend to have instrumental function. Now, these are the people that you're meeting: classrooms, offices, coworkers, bosses, friends, networks, etc. These people tend to be able to provide you opportunity, and you're going to speak them on a more instrumental function, not expressive. So you're going to talk with them in a more professional and less, I feel really sad because, more like, I'm worried about this situation because I want to go forward here. So think about how you would address someone. Myself, if you're going to email me as a professor, I doubt you're going to tell me about your woes, sadnesses, and what's going on with your life. You're going to try to ask for something from me, extension, or like something's going on in your life. You may plead emotionally, some people do, but the reality is that you're not going to go to your boss and tell them, I just had a really bad, no good day, and I don't want to come into work today. That's not going to go well. You're going to have to come up with a reason, doctor's note, or like something that is official, because it's instrumental. It serves a purpose. It's an instrument. This relationship is an instrument. Take that word instrumental, break it down. It is an instrument that you need to learn how to play and master so that you can move forward in these relationships. So in the classroom, how are you going to play the game of school? Offices, how are you going to play the game of work? Coworkers, how are you going to manipulate or utilize that connection to be able to take it to the next level? It's really important to realize something my father once told me: life's a game in every facet of it. Work is a game. How do you get better at it? How do you get to the next level faster? How do you find how to do a speed run, right? If you think of things as games rather than as obligations, you can take the instrument or the instrumental function of secondary groups in work world and be able to manipulate it to your benefit. Now, same question again, can these groups become interchanged, intersected? Of course they are. This little meme right here is fun, right? When your work bestie leaves, when you get to an office, you may experience this. I've already had this happen, but they can. Neither primary or secondary groups have set or strict definitions or limits, right? You could have a coworker become your closest friend, best man, best woman, best them, they at your wedding, right? It doesn't really matter. It's about how you bond and you connect those social bonds again. Cohorts in school can become closer than family because you share that experience of the hard work of graduate school. Coworkers can tend to be the people that you vent to. Going back to our last lecture, they can be the stranger, someone who's a little farther off that you can share with, and then that eventually leads them into the inner circle of your life. So yes, these groups can be completely interchanged. It'd be a fun thing to talk about on Yellow Dig, about how you've seen these things change if you've had work experience. Have any of you had opportunities where your coworker become closer than your family? Share, I'd love to hear about it. So what measures success? Well, to you, Well, this is one of the things. I have a close friend of mine in sales. His name is Morgan, and he talked about his first introductory sociology course. And what had happened in that situation is that he had found himself really interested in the construct of a reference group. Now, you can read the slide if you'd like, but a reference group essentially is how you refer yourself to the world around you, right? You are able to see success gauged both limitedly or expandedly based on the people that surround you. If you grew up in a family of $30,000, $50,000 collective income together with both your parents, maybe let's say 60, then 60 would look like a decent amount of money to you. So, but if someone made $100,000 on your neighborhood, that person's rich, right? They're rich. They're the kids who are rich. Those are those little bougie kids that you always make fun of who lived in that neighborhood. Well, 100K is nothing to someone making $300,000 a year. It keeps going like this, right? A millionaire thinks a billion is dollars is a lot of money. Someone who's a billionaire thinks $1 trillion might be the next level of money. How you see yourself and how you set your goals is really definitive by your reference group, right? If you came from a family of divorce and you've had a bad history of relationships, couple goals is going to have a different definition than someone who came from a long-term marriage to family, right? If you've never had divorce in your family, being married is just the norm. Staying married is just the norm. If you're from somebody who had a broken family, for the lack of a better term, finding someone who's been able to stay together might seem like a couple goal, right? Or I'm going to be successful think about that quote, because you're referring to something that you want to be connected to. It's a subjective reality. It's Thomas' theorem, going back to what we talked about. Chloe on this one has 2.5 million subscribers. Well, what is that to someone like Mr. Beast? 2.5 is just a number he can hit on a week, right? So how we refer ourselves is how we are able to see our own success. And you need to expand your networking through secondary groups, as we talked about in this last slide right here, right? So that you can have a larger reference group, because you are limited by the access of how you see the world. And it's a big deal, right? So how you view yourself and your perspective is based upon the limitations or what you think is or is not the level that you want to achieve. So in groups and out groups, going here, we have the Illuminati, right? Just because we can't see it. But essentially, in groups and out groups, it was the sociologist William Sumner who developed the concept of the in group and out group to help explain the complex phenomenon that comes with the exclusion or inclusion of people with certain groups, right? If you're not a part of the in crowd, I go where the in crowd goes. Might be a song too old for you. But if you're a part of the in group, then you have shared collective experiences. And those who are not a part of the in group, who are in the out group, are sometimes demonized or held as lesser than. And this goes on both sides. If you have somebody who is a part of a high culture in group, let's say that you're a part of elite status, like these pictures down here. This one in the middle is Bohemian Grove, sorry. We have the Illuminati, who's supposed to be referencing everything, right? And then we have a lot of other things such as Scientology. These people make decisions and there's a power elite dynamic to them, right? They require membership to be a part of. Those who are not a part of them don't get access to the information, don't get connected to the surface of what's important. Similarly, if you look at the idea of fraternity and Greek life here on campus, right? There's a connecting bond to those who've been a part of Greek life forever. When you go to job interviews in the future, you can connect up to what sorority or fraternity you're within, because it's an in-out group. You can see this with sports teams. You can see this with almost anything. It's kind of ethnocentric in groups, but you also see the negative, where like if you are a part of a racist group, then you may not want to be a part of people who are not a part of the racial identity that you want to be associated with. This is when you start seeing how it can be bad and it can be good. But essentially what you're looking at consistently is that these in and out groups play a large role in how we view people on the outside. If you're a fan of Mean Girls, right, you have the idea of the plastics, that would be an in group. Everyone else was used an out group. So it really is tied so much to, and we make these memberships and we join them all the time. It just ends up being true. And so it'd be a great conversation to have to talk about the low/popular culture in groups and out groups, high culture in groups, out groups, and what membership benefits there are. Any of you in Greek life, it'd be a great time in Yeldig to talk about ways that you've seen this type of in group, out group dynamic work. So pulling a little further here, right? In groups, a group we feel belong to, right? Connects you with your values and who you are. An in-group can be used for positive or negative. I talked about this: positive sports teams, alumni, Greek life, etc. Negative, Ku Klux Klan, neo-Nazis. It's just a little messed up. Again, I have this lyric from an old song if you're interested, but in-groups can have the concept of they are not like us. And it's just something that's interesting to see because it has pros, it has cons, ethnocentric value structures behind it, but it also has unification, right? You're a part of the in-group, you feel connected, you feel involved. And as humans, we are group and social creatures. We want to be involved in things. I want to be in the room wherever it happens. Think about Hamilton, right? Because you want to be a part of these things. Outgroups, a group we don't belong to, groups that we do not feel that we belong to or feel that disdain having competition with. Outgroups are simply ones who are not a part of the in-group. So it's interesting because it's totally subjective view, right? If you're a part of an outgroup, some people believe that's the in-group, like the people who are anti-everything, right? If you are just, I hate society, I don't want to be a part of it, that's the in group there to you. Like the out group is the people who are a part of culture. So it's really subjective of how you see this in group, out group. There are structures established with it, right? Social constructions of reality, being a part of exclusive membership, having rights to things, right? Sometimes you pay memberships to certain brands to get the box charms and stuff like that, right? Like these loot crate boxes sent to you, and now you're part of that clique. If you're a video gamer, the Dota community, the League of Legends community is infamously toxic, except if you're good and you've been part of it, in-group, out-group, right? It transfers even into digital technology and video game world, right? So an out-group can be used for positive or negative. Positive competition can be healthy and it breeds people wanting to unify together. Rivalry, UA versus ASU. Sports rivalry, Packers versus Bears. I'm from Chicago. Yeah, I know people who literally do not even talk to people in Wisconsin because of how far they've taken that in-group association. And Greek life competitions, right? Again, we're on a college campus. It's a great way to look at that. Negative, segregation of people, unequal treatment, and violence. This is just the problem, right? When you start saying, I am better, we are better, you start creating a we, and the we creates this divide. And then you start looking at everyone who's not a part of the we or the I am a part of, and then you look negatively upon them, right? A little tangent here for you. I, in my undergrad, remember going to a bar when I was 21, of course. And I remember seeing someone come with a outfit that was of the rival school. It wasn't a ha-he moment. They got into a physical fight. Someone was really hurt and justified through this circumstance. I was in Hawaii once with my family when I was younger, and this guy came up to me and he saw the school I was wearing. And he goes, "Hey, trip to Hawaii, couldn't your parents afford to send you to a better school if you're going to this nice vacation?" And my mom went red in the face, like she was like a tomato. See how white I am? Imagine it all red. And she was just so offended. And I knew what it was though, because I was a part of the in-group knowledge. It was a rivalry between the two schools. And I looked back at him and goes, maybe you should have gone to the better school. And we just giggled and laughed and had a moment of sharing with each other. And this is because there's these dynamics of competition, but you can also take this too far. Segregation, unequal treatment, and violence. So that kid getting beaten up because he wore the wrong school outfit, this is where you see violence instead of friendly competition. Sexism can be involved in this, racism, favoritism, cliques. It can be problematic. Some group dynamics for you. We've touched on this a little bit, but we have the idea of dyads and triads, right? Small groups tend to have a stronger bond. So you have the shared perspectives, you have similar objectives, less chance to achieve larger goals though, because of the limited capacity of how far you can go, and tends to fall apart, right? If you only have two people, think about marriage. If one leaves, the group's done. So it's really collectively strong, marriage, best friends, two-person teams, but it also has the con that if one leaves, it's over. Now, the small-ish group, according to Zimmel, is this idea of the smallish group triad, tri meaning three. Power struggles, now you have 2 versus 1, 1v1v1. Majority rules, 2 over 1, now you're ruled out. Even if you didn't want to do it, you have to do it because the group agreed. Longer lasting, this is a pro, right? Because there's 3, if one leaves, there's now a dyad, you can add another one, again, it's a triad. Can obtain larger goals because you have more reach, more connections through the various connections that we all have through our primary and secondary groups, and more potential diversity of thought. It's not just 2 people who share a similar mind. You have 3 people now. Now you have more thoughts, more cooks in the kitchen. It can cause chaos, but it allows for better recipes to be made. Friend groups, polyamorous couples, small teams. These are some examples of triads. So Zimmel's work on this idea of dyads and triads is very important, and it really shows you that there are complexities and intricacies behind the size of groups. If you haven't thought about that, you really need to, right? Think about you and your bestie, right? That's 2 people, really connected. But if you and your bestie have a rift, it's over. Well, think about people who have groups, larger groups, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 people, right? It just has a different type of dynamic involved in it. It may not be as fun sometimes too, because you only have 2 or 3 or 4, but how the group grows defines its culture. How the culture is defined also is able to establish the foundation that it's built on. So group structure, larger groups, inability to interact with everyone at once. One of the cons, right? Hard to define when this occurs. It's usually about 3+ people with large groups. That's kind of what you need to know, the important thing, the idea. After 3+, it becomes 4. It becomes about large groups. Social networks. This is a web of group affiliations. And some things about this, right? Just clearing the slide here for you. More violences, more voices, not violences, more voices, more attention, can't talk, I apologize. More division and pressure on members for options of change, less cohesion because you have so many people in the kitchen, too many cooks in the kitchen, right? Hierarchies are established and leaders are put into place to have maintaining this dynamic. So you have to have levels of leadership, hierarchies. Large area of connection, local or international, shared ties, Greek life and clubs and political organizations. This is when you start talking into the social network, less in the larger group. The larger you get, the more voice and range you have, but also the more dysfunctional you become, because the reality is that as you become larger, you aren't able to maintain that salience that kind of keeps you bonded. That's where you start seeing disruptions happen, because you can go and play a game of telephone and start switching the message of who's hearing what. So broken down just for your clarity here, social networks are a bridge between online and offline networks of large proportion, collective groupthink, hive mind. If you're watching Stranger Things, they reference that, right? Major individual disconnection, extremely low cohesion. And so basically the collective groupthink, it's not all of us thinking the same. It's kind of like lots of voices, lots of cooks in the kitchen, but high impact for large goals because of how much outreach you have. Local meeting places, online forums, social media, Facebook, Instagram, Reddit, right? All these different places can be examples of social networks that you can build upon. So group structure matters. How you go from 2 to 3 to large groups to social networks really plays into how you build the world around you. So let's do a little bit of conversation here. In your book, you would have read about Milgram's small world experiment, a little breakdown for you here, right? 300 packages sent from Boston/Nebraska, 1 target, 64 reached the destination, 5.2 average pathway, meaning only 5.2 actually reached their destination. A little bias check here for you. It was also sent to people all in the same field. So it could have been a little bit less beneficially trackable if it hadn't been as such. But the world really is a small place. If you think about how many times you've run into somebody that knows you, you start seeing the 7 degrees of separation, right? But you start seeing that the world is pretty small. And you hear people say that a lot, like, oh, small world, right? It really is, because it's interesting how much we see this. Erdo's button and thread theory that you read about in the book is a good example, right? Like how what buttons are threaded and weaved through each other defines if it's going to hold or not. This is how social networks are very built upon too. If the number of links per node is small, the network is fragmented and may not work. But when you pass threshold of a link, one link per node, the entire behavior changes and you start seeing things hold, just like the threads, it holds together. So the small world of networks created creates the opportunities that you're going to see. Now, I mentioned this earlier, and I said 7 degrees. It used to be not 6 degrees, and even arguably Tyson said that it could be 3 now. But the internet has expanded this idea of how separated we really are, right? There's a whole TikTok about show me you know someone, so you connect the dots, and you're able to see how you know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody that connects you to these people. So it's fascinating when you look at it. I was doing the Kinsey report in this class, which we'll get to, and Kinsey's nephew was in my class. Small world, right? You never know who's around you. Greta Van famously said, sociologist, you are more likely to get a job from a random acquaintance than you are your close friends. Please remember this. Do not limit yourself to your close friends. You are more likely to get opportunities by expanding your reference group and by expanding your networks so that you can build into the areas you want to go. If you do not do this, you are limited by how advanced or how connected your family is or your friends are. And you guys are all likely it's probably similar. It's why you became friends. So you want some diversity. You want some different thoughts in the kitchen so that you can have opportunities. Close friends share the same nodes, random acquaintances in different nodes, thus expanding your reach and showing how the world is separated. It's very important to know these things. So please watch the video on 6 degrees of separation, which is on your Canvas. And you know what would be fun to play? Play 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon, or play how many ways that you're connected to people. Do some of these separation dynamics on Yellow Dig. Post how you can connect to some celebrities if you're interested in that, or friends, or someone famous. It's really cool to see how small the world really is. I'll gladly share a story on Yellow Dig about one of the professors here on campus and how I ended up knowing everyone he knows, but I never knew him. But we should have been in the same circle. Now, this is my Facebook. I'm sure you're so bored to look at it, but this is what we in sociology call a sociogram, essentially showing all the nodes, and you can see all the fibers, all the little button threads, like Erdo was talked about, of how I'm connected to people. I don't know if I'm still connected to a lot of these people this time. This was back in 2012. But essentially what you're looking at is, how are we connected? Where are we connected? Look at all these little lines. I always tell this little quick story, but my wife is this one, Chloe. And if I hadn't had all these connections that connected up to her, I wouldn't have met her. I lived probably 2-3 blocks away from her my whole life, never had met her until one of my friends came to one of my parties and brought her. And then I realized how many connections we had. And it's interesting when you think about it. Everyone loves to say, I wish I'd never dated this person, met this person. You know, they ruined my life. Interesting statement. Everyone said it. But think about it. What if you did cut that tie? how many of these webs would fall apart? How many of the people you know now wouldn't be in your life if you hadn't met the people that maybe caused you a little trauma? Because it's in our it's in our engagements with one another that we start seeing the socialization and the building of these reference groups networks and seeing these little strands connect up. So I'm a big fan of sociograms because you start seeing how it webs together. Don't talk about Cambridge Analytica. We don't talk about Bruno. It was kind of using sociograms that happened. Don't tell anybody. But take sociology's idea, use them for money, tends to be problematic. Anyway, essentially, this is what Facebook looks like on the inside when you do a sociogram. This is how I'm connected with all these people back in 2012. So group conformity. Please make sure to watch this video, Brain Games Asch Experiment. I'll usually play it in class. It shows you how we respond to people's pressures. Essentially, Solomon Asch Experiment explored the power of group unity and how far people would go to not stand out, even if they knew they were wrong. Essentially, TLDR, he would have groups. One person would be the only person who was actually there. Everyone else is a plant. He would show them lines, and it was obvious that line C was the longest line, but he'd ask them to tell them what is the longest line. He'd have the real person go last, all the plants would go first. Everyone would say that it was B, and then see how many times the person who was real would say that it was C. And many times, over 50% of the time, they would say it because people want to follow the group. It's actually bred into our hunter-gatherer mentality that it's pretty dangerous to run down the path if someone tells us there's a saber-tooth tiger down that path. So following group conformity can save lives. But at the same time, how much do you think for yourself? How much do you do what you do because everyone does it? How many of you have gone out and gotten drunk or had a few drinks or stayed out too late because your friend said you had to come and they peer pressured you and you're worried about having FOMO? How much of your day-to-day interactions are truly and utterly based around making sure you fit in and you're a part of the things that are going on socially every single day? How many of you really truly stand up and say, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not interested. It's interesting to think about. Another group conformity is the Milgram experiment. I would usually show a video, but I'll have it linked and I'm going to make it optional. Trigger warnings with it, but Milgram has done his experiment. Essentially what he did is he had a massive organizational thing and it improved the idea of groupthink. We follow orders by those we believe that we're secure of. Milgram had an idea of learners and educators. The learners and educators. The learner would be the one strapped to an electric node, right? He had an electric on his arm, actually even further. And then the educator, who was the person, everything else was a plant. The doctor was a plant. The learner was a plant. It was all a plant. Would then administer electric shocks when the learner would answer something wrong, all the way from non-harmful to lethal, like electric death, right? And essentially you'd go on the list and every time he got it wrong, it's shot. Over 60% of people maintained administering the lethal shock in the Milgram experiment. And we've redone it, not since just Milgram's time. Eli Roth did it in 2012. They've done it since then, many, many more times, and the number stays the same. I beg and ask you this question. How many of you have read every single side effect possible in antibiotics? How many of you know what's exactly in ibuprofen, or do you take it because your head hurts, because a doctor has told you? How many of you have stopped, dropped, and thought when a doctor tells you take this medication, or do you take it because you trust them because they're a doctor? How many of you have listened to authority when they tell you to do something? Milgram did the experiment because his grandparents were victims of the Holocaust. He wanted to prove that the Nazis were just evil. It wasn't the case. That wasn't how it broke down. It ended up being that many of the Nazis came back and said, I did what I did because I was following orders. And to this day, every time we've redone this study, it shows that most people do just follow orders. Would you say no? Have you said no? Think about it. How many times have you done something because someone you trusted told you to do it? So groupthink, collectively going along with the group, this is referred to as hive mind, Stranger Things 4, right? The hive mind, they've been talking about it, can lead to bad decisions by the group. So think about every horror movie ever. Why do we split up? I don't know. Everyone's going to die in that movie if they do that. Why don't we just leave out the front door? Scream. Good question. Groupthink. Needs for diverse perspectives and questioning group decisions. It's important to have someone there, that's the larger group, to have more cooks in the kitchen. Strength in numbers, weakness by individual. So you're starting to look at why we want to have this conformity in a group, because it protects us, or so we think. These are some fun videos for you to watch. This is the Milgram one. It will be posted on slides. I advise you watch it. I'm also going to put it in the media please watch section. Brain Games Conformity. This is super funny. If you didn't know, and a little segue for when you do watch it, it used to be a practice to actually go and hire somebody to stand up, clap, or laugh or cry based in your play. You pay them money because after a certain amount of people stand up, clap, laugh, or cry, everyone feels like they're missing out on something and they may laugh, stand up, or cry. How many of you have given a courtesy clap, a courtesy laugh? How many of you have given a courtesy laugh? Come on, don't lie to yourself. You know you've done it. You know you've done it probably in this class. or in another class where you feel that you have to laugh because you're trying to make the person feel better. And then enough people start laughing. How many of you don't want to raise your hand, but then you wait until someone raises their hand? We tend to follow the herd. And that is a big thing to learn. But that being said, you have your quiz, it is due. Make sure you do it. Make sure you follow through. Make sure you're posting on Yellow Dig. Do the usual things. Make sure you stay up to date on all of your work. This is Professor McQueen. I am excited to continue teaching you this course. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please make sure to post on Yellow Dig, do your assignments, reach out to me if you need assistance. Otherwise, I appreciate your time, and I will see you in the next video.